What happens when a family's darkest secret is literally erased from history? In 1883, a single photograph held a truth so dangerous that an entire family conspired to make a young boy disappear. Not just from their lives, but from existence itself. This is the extraordinary true story of how modern technology revealed a 140-year-old cover-up that would shake the foundations of American historical understanding. Subscribe to our channel now. This story will change how you see historical photographs forever. The morning fog hung low over Hartford, Connecticut, as Dr. Sarah Mitchell pulled into the parking lot of the Connecticut Historical Society. It was October 15, 2023, exactly 140 years to the day since a young boy named Denzel had been erased from history, though Sarah didn't know that yet. She was simply excited about the new project that awaited her, restoring a collection of 19th-century family photographs that had been donated by one of Connecticut's most prominent historical families. Sarah had built her reputation as one of the country's leading experts in photographic restoration. Her laboratory at Yale University was equipped with the most advanced imaging technology available, capable of revealing details in historical photographs that previous generations of researchers could never have imagined. But nothing in her 20-year career had prepared her for what she was about to discover. The Connecticut Historical Society's archive room was a treasure trove of American history. Rows upon rows of climate-controlled cabinets housed documents, photographs, and artifacts dating back to the colonial period. Mrs. Catherine Reynolds, the Society's chief archivist, led Sarah through the maze of historical materials to a special collection that had been recently donated. "The Whitmore family has been incredibly generous," Mrs. Reynolds explained as she carefully removed a series of photographs from their protective sleeves. "They've donated their entire family archive, photographs, letters, business documents, personal diaries. It's one of the most complete family collections we've ever received." The Whitmore name carried significant weight in Connecticut history. Edmund Whitmore had been a successful textile manufacturer in the 1880s, and his descendants had continued to play prominent roles in business, politics, and philanthropy for generations. The family's Victorian mansion, now a museum, was one of Hartford's most visited historical sites. Sarah examined the photographs with practiced eyes. Most were typical family portraits of the era, formal poses, elaborate clothing, serious expressions. But one photograph immediately caught her attention. It was larger than the others, clearly a formal family portrait taken in a professional studio. The date inscribed on the back read, October 1883. "This is beautiful work," Sarah murmured, studying the composition. "The lighting, the poses, this was done by a skilled photographer." The image showed the Whitmore family in their finest attire. Edmund Whitmore stood tall and imposing in a dark suit, his hand resting on the shoulder of his seated wife, Margaret. She wore an elaborate bustle dress with intricate beadwork, her hair styled in the fashion of the day. Their 3 children were arranged around them. 16-year-old Edmund Jr. stood beside his father, while 14-year-old Catherine and 12-year-old William flanked their mother. But as Sarah continued to examine the photograph under her magnifying glass, something began to trouble her. The composition felt incomplete. There was an unusual amount of empty space on the left side of the image, and the lighting patterns didn't quite match what she would expect from a photographer of this caliber. "Mrs. Reynolds," Sarah said slowly, "do you have any other versions of this photograph?" Sometimes families would order multiple prints, or photographers would take several shots. Mrs. Reynolds consulted her catalogue. "Actually, yes. There are several copies in the collection, and they seem to span different time periods. Some are clearly older than others." As Mrs. Reynolds brought out the additional photographs, Sarah's suspicions deepened. There were indeed multiple versions of what appeared to be the same family portrait, but they weren't identical. In some versions, the empty space on the left was even more pronounced. In others, there were subtle differences in the shadows and lighting. "I'd like to take these back to my lab for detailed analysis," Sarah said. "There's something unusual about these images that I need to investigate further." Back at Yale, Sarah began the painstaking process of analyzing the photographs using every tool at her disposal. She started with high-resolution digital scanning, capturing details invisible to the naked eye. Then she moved on to spectral analysis, using different wavelengths of light to reveal hidden layers in the photographic emulsion. Her assistant, Dr. James Chen, was a specialist in digital forensics who had recently joined her team from the FBI's art crime unit. "What exactly are we looking for?" he asked as he helped set up the equipment. "I'm not sure yet," Sarah admitted. "But something about the composition of this photograph doesn't feel right. The spacing, the shadows, the way the family is positioned, it's as if there's a missing piece." The first breakthrough came when Sarah applied infrared imaging to the photograph. Infrared light could penetrate the surface layers of the photographic emulsion and reveal details that had been obscured or altered. As the image appeared on her computer screen, Sarah gasped. There, faint but unmistakable, was the outline of a figure on the left side of the photograph. It was small, clearly a child, and positioned slightly apart from the main family group. "James, look at this," Sarah called out, her voice tight with excitement. "There's someone else in this photograph." James leaned over her shoulder, studying the ghostly outline on the screen. "It's definitely a person, a child by the size, but why would they be so faint?" Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. This could be evidence of photographic manipulation. In the 1880s, it was possible to alter photographs, though it required considerable skill and expense. Someone may have deliberately removed this figure from later versions of the image. The next step was chemical analysis. Sarah carefully prepared a small sample from the edge of the photograph and subjected it to mass spectrometry. The results confirmed her suspicions. There were multiple layers of photographic emulsion, indicating that the image had been altered after its original development. "This is incredible," James said as they reviewed the data. "Someone went to considerable trouble to remove this child from the photograph. But why?" Sarah was already planning the next phase of her investigation. "We need to try to restore the original image. If we can bring back the missing figure, we might be able to understand what happened here." The restoration process was delicate and time-consuming. Using a combination of chemical treatments and digital enhancement, Sarah began to coax the hidden image back to visibility. Hour by hour, day by day, the ghostly outline became clearer. After 2 weeks of painstaking work, the figure finally emerged in full detail. It was a young black boy, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, wearing simple clothes that contrasted sharply with the elaborate attire of the Whitmore family. His expression was solemn, his eyes downcast, and he stood slightly apart from the group, as if uncertain of his place in the composition. "My God," Sarah whispered, staring at the restored image. They erased a child from their family photograph. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a case of photographic manipulation. It was evidence of a deliberate attempt to erase someone from history. But who was this boy, and why had the Whitmore family gone to such lengths to remove him from their family portrait? Sarah knew she needed help to understand the historical context of what she had discovered. She reached out to Dr. Marcus Thompson, a renowned historian at Howard University who specialized in post-Civil War African-American history. Dr. Thompson arrived at Yale 3 days later, and his reaction to the restored photograph was immediate and emotional. "This is extraordinary," he said, studying the image intently. "Do you understand what you found here?" "I know it's evidence of photographic manipulation," Sarah replied, "but I suspect there's much more to the story." "Much more indeed," Dr. Thompson confirmed. "This photograph was taken in 1883, 18 years after the end of the Civil War. Slavery had been abolished, but the social and economic relationships between white and black families were still incredibly complex. This boy's presence in a formal family portrait and his subsequent erasure tells us a great deal about the tensions of that era." Dr. Thompson explained that in the post-war period, many wealthy northern families had maintained informal arrangements with formerly enslaved people or their children. Some were genuine attempts at providing care and education. Others were barely disguised forms of continued servitude. The fact that this boy was included in the original photograph suggests he was considered part of the household, Dr. Thompson continued, but his erasure indicates that at some point the family decided his presence was inconvenient. Sarah felt a growing sense of responsibility to uncover the full story. "We need to find out who this boy was. He deserves to have his story told. The search for the boy's identity led Sarah and Dr. Thompson to the Whitmore family archives that had been donated to the Historical Society. Mrs. Reynolds gave them access to boxes of documents that hadn't yet been fully catalogued: letters, diaries, business records, and household accounts spanning several decades. The breakthrough came when Dr. Thompson discovered a leather-bound ledger containing household expenses from 1883. Most entries were routine: payments to servants, purchases of food and clothing, maintenance costs for the house and grounds. But one entry, repeated monthly, caught his attention: allowance for D. Washington, 290. D. Washington, Sarah repeated. Could that be our boy? They continued searching through the documents, looking for any reference to D. Washington, or any child who might have lived with the family. The answer came in a series of letters written by Margaret Whitmore to her sister in Boston. The first letter, dated August 1883, was written in Margaret's careful script: "My dearest Elizabeth, I write to you in great distress about the situation with young Denzel. Edmund has become increasingly concerned about the boy's presence in our household, particularly as his political ambitions grow. You know how society views such arrangements, and Edmund fears that our association with the boy could damage his prospects for the state legislature. I confess I am torn. Denzel has been with us for nearly 4 years since his mother's death, and I have grown quite fond of him. He is intelligent and eager to learn, and he has been a companion to our children. But Edmund insists that we must think of our family's reputation first." Sarah felt a chill as she read the letter. Here was documentary evidence of the boy's existence and the family's growing discomfort with his presence. The next letter, dated September 1883, revealed the family's decision. "Elizabeth, we have decided that Denzel must be sent away. Edmund has arranged for him to be placed at the Roxbury Industrial School for Colored Youth in Boston. It pains me greatly as the boy has become dear to me, but Edmund says it is for the best. He will receive an education and training in a useful trade, which is more than many children in his situation can expect. We plan to have him transported to Boston next month." But it was the final letter in the series, dated November 1883, that revealed the full extent of the family's efforts to erase Denzel from their history. "My dear sister, the deed is done. Denzel departed for Boston last month, and Edmund has taken steps to ensure that there will be no complications from his time with us. He has hired a photographer from New York who specializes in retouching work to alter our family portraits. It is as if the boy never existed, which Edmund says is for the best. I have kept one photograph hidden away, the original, before the alterations. Perhaps someday when society is more understanding, the truth can be told. But for now, we must think of our family's future." Sarah and Dr. Thompson sat in stunned silence as they absorbed the full implications of Margaret's words. The Whitmore family had not only sent Denzel away, they had systematically erased all evidence of his existence. "This is one of the most complete examples of historical erasure I've ever encountered," Dr. Thompson said quietly. "They didn't just remove him from their lives, they tried to remove him from history itself." But Sarah was already thinking ahead. If Denzel was sent to the Roxbury Industrial School, there might be records. We could try to trace what happened to him after he left the Whitmore household. Dr. Thompson nodded grimly. Industrial schools kept detailed records. If Denzel survived his time there, we might be able to follow his trail. As they prepared to expand their investigation to Boston, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the boy in the photograph. His downcast eyes, his uncertain posture, the way he stood apart from the family group, it all spoke to a child who understood, perhaps better than anyone, how precarious his position was. "He knew," Sarah said suddenly. "Look at his expression in the photograph. He knew he didn't really belong there." Dr. Thompson studied the restored image again. Children are often more perceptive than adults give them credit for. Denzel probably sensed the tension around his presence long before the family made their decision. The discovery of Denzel's story was just the beginning. Sarah realized that she had stumbled upon something much larger than a single case of photographic manipulation. This was a window into the hidden history of post-Civil War America, a glimpse of the countless stories that had been deliberately buried and forgotten. As news of the discovery began to spread through academic circles, Sarah found herself at the center of a growing controversy. The Whitmore family's modern descendants were not pleased to learn about their ancestors' actions, and some questioned whether the story should be made public at all. But Sarah was determined to see the investigation through to its conclusion. Denzel Washington had been erased from history once. She was not going to let it happen again. The train from New Haven to Boston gave Sarah and Dr. Thompson time to plan their investigation strategy. They had contacted the Massachusetts State Archives, the Boston Public Library, and several historical societies, hoping to find records from the Roxbury Industrial School for Colored Youth. Industrial schools were complicated institutions, Dr. Thompson explained, as the Connecticut countryside rolled past their window. They were often founded with good intentions to provide education and job training for disadvantaged children. But in practice, especially for black children in the 1880s, they could be harsh places that prioritized discipline and labor over genuine education. Sarah had spent the previous evening researching the Roxbury Industrial School online. Founded in 1875, it had been one of several institutions established in the post-Civil War period to deal with the growing number of orphaned and abandoned children, particularly in the black community. The school's stated mission was to provide moral education, practical training, and preparation for useful citizenship, but contemporary accounts suggested a much grimmer reality. Their first stop in Boston was the Massachusetts State Archives, housed in a modern building that contrasted sharply with the historical documents it contained. The archivist, Dr. Patricia Williams, had prepared several boxes of materials related to the Roxbury Industrial School. The school operated from 1875 to 1923, Dr. Williams explained as she led them to a research room. The records are quite complete: intake forms, medical records, educational assessments, disciplinary reports, and discharge documents. If your Denzel Washington was there, we should be able to find him. The intake records were organized chronologically, and it didn't take long to find what they were looking for. There, in a ledger dated October 15, 1883, was an entry that made Sarah's heart race. Denzel Washington, surname assigned upon intake, age approximately 9 years, surrendered by the Whitmore family of Hartford, Connecticut. Parents deceased. No known relatives. Physical condition: underweight, but otherwise healthy. Mental condition: quiet, appears intelligent. Assigned to Dormitory 3, workshop training in metalwork and carpentry. They even took away his original surname, Sarah said, feeling a surge of anger. Washington was just assigned to him. Dr. Thompson nodded grimly. It was standard practice: strip away their identity, their connections to the past. Make them into whatever the institution needed them to be. The school records painted a detailed but heartbreaking picture of Denzel's life after leaving the Whitmore household. Monthly reports tracked his progress, or lack thereof, in various subjects. The early entries were particularly troubling. November 1883. Subject exhibits signs of melancholy and withdrawal. Refuses to participate in group activities. Often found staring out windows during work periods. Requires frequent discipline to maintain attention. December 1883. Subject continues to display behavioral problems. Caught attempting to write letter, recipient unknown, letter confiscated and destroyed. Subject confined to dormitory for 3 days as punishment. January 1884. Slight improvement in subject's attitude. Responds well to metalwork training. Shows aptitude for detailed work. Still prone to periods of sadness. Sarah found herself becoming emotionally invested in Denzel's story as she read through the monthly reports. The clinical language couldn't hide the fact that they were documenting the systematic breaking down of a child's spirit. "Look at this," Dr. Thompson said, pointing to an entry from March 1884. "He was trying to write letters. He was probably trying to contact the Whitmore family." The medical records were equally disturbing. Denzel had been treated multiple times for malnutrition, exhaustion, and what the school doctor described as nervous disorders. There were also several entries documenting injuries from workshop accidents, cuts from metalworking tools, burns from the forge, a broken finger from a carpentry mishap. But as the months passed, the records began to show signs of Denzel's resilience. His workshop supervisors noted his growing skill in metalwork, and his academic assessments showed steady improvement in reading and mathematics. September 1884. Subject has shown remarkable improvement in all areas. Metalwork instructor reports exceptional aptitude, reading level now appropriate for age, behavior much improved, though subject remains somewhat withdrawn. December 1884. Subject selected for advanced metalwork training, shows leadership qualities among younger students, recommended for early apprenticeship program. Sarah felt a mixture of sadness and admiration as she read about Denzel's gradual adaptation to his circumstances. Despite the trauma of his abandonment and the harsh conditions of the school, he had found ways to survive and even excel. The record showed that Denzel remained at the Roxbury Industrial School until 1890, when he was 16 years old. His discharge papers indicated that he had been apprenticed to Morrison & Sons Metalworks in Boston's South End, one of the city's most respected blacksmith shops. He made it, Sarah said, feeling a surge of relief. He survived the school and found a real opportunity. But Dr. Thompson was already thinking ahead. Now we need to find out what happened to him after his apprenticeship. Did he stay in Boston? Did he marry? Have children? We need to trace his entire life story. Their next stop was the Boston Public Library's Research Division, where they hoped to find city directories, marriage records, and other documents that might shed light on Denzel's adult life. The librarian, Ms. Jennifer Martinez, was intrigued by their quest and offered to help with the search. The South End in the 1890s was a vibrant community, Ms. Martinez explained as she pulled out several volumes of city directories. It was one of the few areas where black professionals and skilled workers could find decent housing and establish businesses. The 1892 Boston City Directory listed Denzel Washington, metalworker, at an address on Columbus Avenue in the South End. By 1895, the listing had changed to Denzel Washington, blacksmith, suggesting that he had completed his apprenticeship and established himself as an independent craftsman. But it was in the 1898 directory that they found the most significant development. Denzel Washington, blacksmith, married to Mary Elizabeth Johnson Washington. He found love, Sarah said softly. After everything he went through, he found someone to share his life with. The marriage records at Boston City Hall provided more details. Denzel Washington had married Mary Elizabeth Johnson on June 12, 1898, at St. Augustine's Episcopal Church in the South End. The marriage certificate listed Denzel's age as 24 and his occupation as master blacksmith. Mary was 22 and worked as a seamstress. The church records, which they accessed with the help of the current pastor, Reverend Michael Davis, revealed even more about Denzel's life in Boston. He had become an active member of the congregation, serving on the church council and helping to organize community events. The South End in those days was a close-knit community, Reverend Davis explained as he showed them through the church's historical archives. Families looked out for each other, and the church was the center of social and political life. In a box of church newsletters from the early 1900s, they found several references to Denzel's growing prominence in the community. He had established his own blacksmith shop by 1900 and was known for his skill in decorative ironwork. Several of his pieces still adorned buildings in the South End. But it was a newspaper clipping from 1905 that revealed another dimension of Denzel's character. The Boston Guardian, one of the city's black newspapers, had published an article about a speech Denzel had given at a community meeting about education. Mr. Denzel Washington, the well-known blacksmith and community leader, spoke eloquently about the importance of education for our children. Drawing from his own experiences at the Roxbury Industrial School, Mr. Washington emphasized that while practical training is valuable, our young people also deserve access to literature, history, and the arts. I was taught to work with my hands, Mr. Washington said, but I taught myself to work with my mind. Every child deserves both opportunities. Sarah felt chills reading those words. Despite the trauma of his childhood, Denzel had become an advocate for education and opportunity for others. The church records also revealed that Denzel and Mary had 4 children. Robert, born 1899, Margaret, born 1901, Elizabeth, born 1904, and James, born 1907. The choice of names was significant. Margaret was clearly named after Margaret Whitmore, suggesting that despite his abandonment, Denzel retained some affection for the woman who had cared for him. He named his daughter after Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Thompson observed. That's remarkable considering what the family did to him. Sarah was beginning to understand the complexity of Denzel's character. He was someone who had experienced profound betrayal, but had somehow found the strength to forgive and move forward with his life. Their research revealed that Denzel's blacksmith shop had prospered, and by 1910 he owned his own building on Columbus Avenue. He had become one of the most successful black businessmen in the South End, employing several apprentices and taking on major contracts for decorative ironwork throughout Boston. But perhaps most significantly, they discovered that Denzel had become involved in the early civil rights movement. In 1909, he was listed as a founding member of the Boston chapter of the NCACP, and he had served on the organization's executive committee for several years. A 1915 article in The Crisis, the NCACP's national magazine, featured a profile of Denzel that provided insight into his motivations. Mr. Washington's commitment to civil rights stems from his own experiences with injustice. As a child, he was abandoned by a white family who feared that his presence would damage their social standing. Rather than allowing this betrayal to embitter him, Mr. Washington has channeled his experiences into a determination to ensure that other children do not suffer similar fates. I was erased from one family's history, he told The Crisis, but I will not be erased from the history of our struggle for equality. Sarah felt a profound sense of connection to Denzel as she read those words. He had understood exactly what had been done to him, and he had chosen to fight back not with anger or revenge, but with dignity and determination. The final piece of Denzel's story came from the death records at Boston City Hall. Denzel Washington had died on March 15, 1924, at the age of 50. The cause of death was listed as pneumonia, but the obituary in the Boston Guardian painted a picture of a life well lived. Denzel Washington, master blacksmith and civil rights leader, passed away peacefully at his home on Columbus Avenue, surrounded by his loving family. Mr. Washington was known throughout Boston for his exceptional craftsmanship, his generous spirit, and his unwavering commitment to justice and equality. He is survived by his wife Mary, 4 children, and 7 grandchildren. His legacy lives on in the countless lives he touched and the community he helped to build. As Sarah and Dr. Thompson concluded their research in Boston, they realized they had uncovered not just the story of a boy who had been erased from a photograph, but the remarkable life story of a man who had overcome incredible obstacles to become a leader and role model for his community. "We need to find his descendants," Sarah said as they prepared to return to Connecticut. "They deserve to know about the photograph and about their ancestors' connection to the Whitmore family." Dr. Thompson agreed. "And the Whitmore family descendants need to understand the full impact of their ancestors' actions. This isn't just ancient history, it's a story that continues to resonate today." But as they boarded the train back to New Haven, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their investigation was just beginning. The discovery of Denzel's erasure from the Whitmore family photograph had opened a window into a hidden chapter of American history, and she suspected there were many more stories waiting to be uncovered. The return to Connecticut marked the beginning of the most challenging phase of Sarah's investigation. Armed with the complete story of Denzel Washington's life, she now faced the delicate task of sharing her findings with both the Whitmore family descendants and the broader public. The implications of her discovery extended far beyond academic interest. This was a story that would force people to confront uncomfortable truths about American history and the ongoing legacy of racism. Sarah's first call was to Mrs. Catherine Reynolds at the Connecticut Historical Society. The archivist listened in stunned silence as Sarah recounted the full scope of their findings: the photographic manipulation, the documentary evidence of Denzel's erasure, and the remarkable story of his subsequent life in Boston. "This is extraordinary," Mrs. Reynolds said when Sarah finished her account. "But I have to ask, what do you plan to do with this information? The Whitmore family has been generous supporters of our institution for generations. It was a question that Sarah had been grappling with throughout her research. She understood the delicate position of the Historical Society, but she also felt a profound responsibility to ensure that Denzel's story was told. "The truth has a way of coming out eventually," Sarah replied. "We can either be part of telling this story responsibly and completely, or we can wait for someone else to discover it and tell it without the full context we've uncovered." Mrs. Reynolds agreed to arrange a meeting with the Whitmore family's current representatives. The family's interests were managed by a trust overseen by several descendants, including Eleanor Hartwell, Edmund Whitmore's great-great-granddaughter, who served as the family's primary liaison with historical institutions. The meeting was scheduled for the following week at the Whitmore Mansion, now the Whitmore Historical Museum. Sarah spent the intervening days preparing a comprehensive presentation that would lay out her findings in a clear and sensitive manner. She knew that the family's initial reaction might be defensive, and she wanted to emphasize the historical significance of the discovery, rather than casting blame on people who had been dead for over a century. Eleanor Hartwell was a woman in her 70s, with silver hair and the kind of dignified bearing that spoke of generations of privilege and social responsibility. She had devoted much of her life to preserving her family's legacy and supporting various historical and charitable causes. The news of Sarah's discovery clearly shook her. "Are you absolutely certain about these findings?" Eleanor asked after Sarah had presented the restored photograph and the supporting documentary evidence. "I understand this is difficult to hear," Sarah replied gently, "but the evidence is overwhelming. The photographic analysis, the chemical testing, the family letters, they all tell the same story." Eleanor studied the restored photograph for a long time, her eyes fixed on Denzel's small figure. "He looks so young," she said quietly, "so vulnerable." Also present at the meeting were two other family descendants, Robert Whitmore III, a successful businessman who served as the trust's financial manager, and Dr. Patricia Whitmore Chen, a professor of American history at Wesleyan University. Their reactions to Sarah's presentation were markedly different. Robert was clearly uncomfortable with the implications of the discovery. "This happened 140 years ago," he said. "Why should we tarnish our family's reputation over something that was done by people who are long dead?" But Patricia, as a historian herself, understood the significance of Sarah's findings. "This isn't about tarnishing anyone's reputation," she said firmly. "This is about historical truth. Our ancestors made a choice that reflected the prejudices and pressures of their time, but that doesn't mean we have to perpetuate their cover-up." Eleanor found herself caught between these competing perspectives. "What exactly are you proposing we do?" she asked Sarah. Sarah had given considerable thought to this question. "I believe we have an opportunity to turn this discovery into something positive. We can tell Denzel's complete story, not just his erasure, but his remarkable life afterward. We can use this as a teaching moment about the complexities of American history and the importance of confronting difficult truths." The discussion continued for several hours, with family members expressing a range of emotions, from shame to anger to curiosity. Eleanor asked detailed questions about Denzel's life in Boston, clearly moved by the story of his success, despite the trauma of his abandonment. "He named his daughter Margaret," Eleanor said at one point, tears in her eyes, "after my great-great-grandmother. That suggests he didn't hate her, despite what the family did to him." Sarah nodded. "I think Denzel understood that Margaret Whitmore was caught between her own feelings and the social pressures of the time. The letters suggest she genuinely cared for him, but felt powerless to stand against her husband's decision." As the meeting drew to a close, Eleanor made a decision that surprised everyone present. "I want to meet Denzel's descendants," she announced. "If they're willing, I think it's time for our families to acknowledge what happened and try to make some kind of amends." Robert was aghast. "Eleanor, think about what you're saying. This could open us up to all kinds of legal and financial complications." But Eleanor was resolute. "This isn't about money or legal liability. This is about doing what's right. Our family erased this boy from history. The least we can do is help restore his memory." Meanwhile, Sarah and Dr. Thompson had been working to locate Denzel's living descendants. Through genealogical research and DNA analysis, they had identified several branches of the Washington family tree, many of whom still lived in the Boston area. The first contact was with Dr. Angela Washington Brown, Denzel's great-granddaughter and a retired professor of African American Studies at Harvard University. When Sarah called to explain the discovery, Dr. Washington Brown's reaction was a mixture of excitement and vindication. "We always knew there were gaps in our family history," she explained during their first phone conversation. "My great-grandfather would sometimes speak of the big house where he lived as a child, but he never gave details. We assumed he had been enslaved somewhere in the South before coming to Boston." Dr. Washington Brown agreed to meet with Sarah and Dr. Thompson at her home in Cambridge. The house was filled with family photographs and memorabilia, including several items that had belonged to Denzel: his blacksmith tools, some of his decorative ironwork, and a collection of books that he had accumulated over the years. "He was largely self-educated," Dr. Washington Brown explained as she showed them through the collection. "He never talked much about his childhood, but he was passionate about learning and made sure all his children received good educations." She introduced them to other family members who had gathered for the meeting: her brother Michael Washington, a community organizer in Boston, her cousin Dr. James Washington, a physician, and several younger relatives who were eager to learn more about their family history. The family's reaction to the restored photograph was emotional and powerful. Michael Washington, in particular, was visibly moved by seeing his great-grandfather as a child. "They tried to erase him from existence," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "But here we are, 4 generations later, living proof that you can't erase a person's legacy." Dr. Washington Brown was more analytical in her response. "This photograph is incredibly valuable from a historical perspective," she said. "It provides visual evidence of the kinds of informal arrangements that existed between white and black families in the post-Civil War period. Most of these stories have been lost because they were deliberately hidden." The family was gracious but firm in their response to the discovery. They wanted Denzel's story told accurately and completely, including the painful truth of his erasure, but they also wanted to emphasize his remarkable achievements and his contributions to the Boston community. "Our great-grandfather overcame incredible obstacles," Dr. Washington Brown said. "He was thrown away by one family, but he built a new family, contributed to his community, and fought for civil rights. That's the story that needs to be told." When Sarah mentioned Eleanor Hartwell's desire to meet with the family, the Washingtons' response was cautious but open. "We're willing to listen," Michael Washington said, "but we want to make sure this isn't just about making the Whitmore family feel better about their ancestors' actions." The meeting between the two families was arranged for the following month at the Connecticut Historical Society on neutral ground that would allow for a respectful dialogue. In the weeks leading up to the meeting, both families spent time processing the emotional weight of the discovery and preparing for what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation. Eleanor Hartwell, in particular, had been deeply affected by learning about Denzel's story. She had spent hours reading through her family's archives, looking for any other references to the boy who had lived in their house for 4 years. She found several mentions in household accounts and a few brief references in family letters, but it was clear that the family had been successful in their efforts to minimize any record of his presence. The most painful discovery came when Eleanor found her great-great-grandmother's private diary hidden away in a trunk in the mansion's attic. The entries from 1883 revealed Margaret Whitmore's internal struggle over the decision to send Denzel away. August 15th, 1883. Edmund grows more insistent each day that Denzel must go. He says the boy's presence compromises our standing in society and could damage his political prospects. "I know he is right, but my heart breaks at the thought of sending the child away. He has been with us since his mother died, and he has become dear to me. He helps me in the garden and listens so intently when I read to him. How can I explain to him that he must leave?" September 3rd, 1883. I tried to speak with Edmund about finding another solution, perhaps sending Denzel to school locally while allowing him to remain with us. But Edmund was adamant. He says the boy must be completely removed from our lives if we are to move forward. I fear I am too weak to stand against him. October 10th, 1883. The arrangements have been made. Denzel will leave for Boston next week. I have tried to prepare him, but how do you explain to a child that he is being sent away not because he has done anything wrong, but because his very existence is inconvenient? I have given him some books and a small amount of money, though Edmund says even this is too much. October 20th, 1883. Denzel left this morning. He did not cry, which somehow made it worse. He simply nodded when I told him to be a good boy and work hard at his studies. As the carriage pulled away, I saw him looking back at the house, and I had to turn away from the window. Edmund says I must not speak of him anymore, that it is for the best, but my heart feels as though it has been torn in two. November 15th, 1883. Edmund has had the family portraits altered to remove any trace of Denzel. The photographer from New York did skillful work. It is as if the boy never existed. But I have kept one photograph hidden away, the original. Perhaps someday, when society is more understanding, the truth can be told. I pray that wherever Denzel is, he knows that he was loved, even if we lack the courage to show it. Eleanor wept as she read her ancestors' words. The diary revealed that Margaret Whitmore had genuinely cared for Denzel, but had been powerless to stand against the social pressures and her husband's ambitions. Armed with this new understanding of her family's history, Eleanor approached the meeting with the Washington family with a mixture of shame, sorrow, and determination to make whatever amends were possible. The meeting took place on a crisp November morning at the Connecticut Historical Society. Both families arrived with a sense of nervous anticipation, unsure of what to expect from this unprecedented encounter. Eleanor had brought copies of Margaret Whitmore's diary entries, as well as other family documents that mentioned Denzel. The Washington family had prepared a presentation about Denzel's life and achievements, including photographs of his ironwork and copies of articles about his civil rights activities. Sarah served as a facilitator for the discussion, helping to guide the conversation and provide historical context when needed. Dr. Thompson was also present, along with Mrs. Reynolds from the Historical Society. The meeting began with Eleanor reading excerpts from Margaret Whitmore's diary. The raw emotion in the 140-year-old words brought tears to the eyes of everyone present, including the Washington family members. She did care about him, Dr. Washington Brown said quietly when Eleanor finished reading. That makes the story both more tragic and more human. Eleanor nodded, her own eyes wet with tears. I can't undo what my family did to Denzel, but I can acknowledge it, and I can try to ensure that his story is told with the dignity and respect he deserved. Michael Washington, who had been skeptical about the meeting, found himself moved by Eleanor's obvious sincerity. "What are you proposing?" he asked. Eleanor had given considerable thought to this question. "I want to establish a scholarship fund in Denzel's name to help young people pursue education and job training. I want to commission a memorial to him that will be displayed prominently in the Whitmore Mansion Museum, and I want to work with your family to ensure that his complete story is told accurately and respectfully." The Washington family was surprised by the scope of Eleanor's proposals. They had expected, at most, a formal apology and perhaps a small donation to charity. But Eleanor was proposing something much more substantial, a genuine effort to honor Denzel's memory and legacy. "We appreciate your sincerity," Dr. Washington Brown said carefully, "but we want to make sure that any memorial or scholarship truly reflects Denzel's values and achievements, not just the Whitmore family's desire to feel better about their ancestors' actions." Eleanor agreed immediately. "I want the Washington family to have full input into any memorial or educational program. This should be about honoring Denzel, not about rehabilitating my family's reputation." The conversation continued for several hours, with both families sharing stories, emotions, and ideas for moving forward. By the end of the meeting, they had agreed to work together on several initiatives. 1. A comprehensive exhibition about Denzel's life that would be displayed at both the Whitmore Mansion Museum and the Boston African American National Historic Site. 2. The Denzel Washington Educational Fund, which would provide scholarships for young people pursuing careers in skilled trades or civil rights advocacy. 3. A memorial garden at the Whitmore Mansion, featuring some of Denzel's original ironwork and a plaque telling his complete story. 4. a collaborative research project to identify and document other cases of historical erasure, using Denzel's story as a starting point for broader conversations about hidden histories. As the meeting concluded, Eleanor and Dr. Washington Brown shook hands, then embraced. It was a moment that seemed to bridge not just the 140 years since Denzel's erasure, but the centuries of racial division that had shaped American history. Denzel would be proud, Dr. Washington Brown said. He always believed that truth and reconciliation were possible, even in the face of injustice. Eleanor nodded, feeling a sense of peace that she hadn't expected. I think Margaret would be proud too. She kept that photograph hidden for a reason. Maybe she knew that someday the truth would come out. 6 months after the historic meeting between the Whitmore and Washington families, the story of Denzel Washington's erasure and restoration had captured national attention. What had begun as a routine photographic restoration project had evolved into a powerful symbol of America's ongoing struggle to confront its hidden histories and heal the wounds of the past. The Smithsonian Institution had reached out to Sarah, requesting permission to feature Denzel's story in a major exhibition titled Invisible Lives, Hidden Stories in American Photography. The exhibition would showcase not only the restored photograph and supporting documents, but also artifacts from Denzel's life in Boston and examples of his decorative ironwork. Dr. Lonnie Bunch, the secretary of the Smithsonian, personally oversaw the development of the exhibition. This story represents something profound about American history, he explained during a planning meeting with Sarah and the two families. It shows us how easily people can be erased from the historical record, but also how truth has a way of emerging, sometimes after many generations. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a side-by-side display of the original and altered versions of the 1883 Whitmore family photograph. Visitors could see exactly how Denzel had been removed from the image, and interactive displays allowed them to learn about the photographic techniques used to accomplish the erasure. But the exhibition went far beyond just documenting the manipulation. It told Denzel's complete life story, from his early years with the Whitmore family through his success as a blacksmith and civil rights leader in Boston. Artifacts from his life included his metalworking tools, examples of his decorative ironwork, photographs of his family, and documents from his involvement with the NAACP. The exhibition also placed Denzel's story in broader historical context, explaining the complex social and economic relationships that existed between white and black families in the post-Civil War period. Interactive displays allowed visitors to explore similar cases of historical erasure and to understand how photography had been used both to document and to manipulate historical narratives. The opening of the exhibition was scheduled for February 2024 during Black History Month. Both the Whitmore and Washington families were invited to speak at the opening ceremony, marking the first time the two families would appear together in public. In the weeks leading up to the opening, media attention intensified. Major newspapers and television networks picked up the story, and social media buzzed with discussions about historical erasure and the power of modern technology to reveal hidden truths. The story resonated particularly strongly with genealogists and family historians, many of whom began examining their own family photographs with new scrutiny. Sarah's laboratory at Yale was flooded with requests from people who suspected that their own family images might have been altered. We've identified at least a dozen other cases of photographic manipulation in family portraits from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Sarah explained to a reporter from the New York Times. Denzel's story isn't unique. It's just the most completely documented case we've found so far. The techniques Sarah had developed for detecting and reversing photographic alterations were being adopted by museums and archives around the world. The Denzel Protocol, as it came to be known, was becoming the standard method for analyzing suspected cases of historical photographic manipulation. Meanwhile, the collaborative initiatives agreed upon by the two families were taking shape. The Denzel Washington Educational Fund had been established with an initial endowment of $500,000, contributed jointly by the Whitmore Family Trust and donations from supporters who had been moved by Denzel's story. The fund's first scholarship recipients were announced in January 2024. They included Maria Santos, a young woman from Hartford who was pursuing training as a welder, James Mitchell, an African-American student from Boston who was studying civil rights law, and David Kim, a recent immigrant who was learning blacksmithing techniques similar to those Denzel had mastered. These scholarships represent the values that Denzel embodied, explained Dr. Washington Brown, who served on the fund's selection committee. Hard work, education, and a commitment to justice and equality. The memorial garden at the Whitmore mansion was also nearing completion. Landscape architects had worked with both families to design a space that would honor Denzel's memory, while fitting harmoniously with the mansion's Victorian architecture. The centerpiece of the garden was a restored piece of Denzel's ironwork, an ornate gate that had originally been created for a church in Boston's South End. The gate had been carefully restored and now served as the entrance to the memorial garden. A bronze plaque beside the gate told Denzel's story in both English and Spanish, reflecting the diverse community that now surrounded the historic mansion. Eleanor Hartwell had thrown herself into the memorial project with remarkable energy for a woman in her 70s. "This has given my life new purpose," she explained to a documentary filmmaker who was creating a film about the discovery. "For too long, our family's legacy was built on a lie. Now we have a chance to build something based on truth." The documentary, titled The Erased Boy, was being produced by an independent filmmaker named Marcus Johnson, who was himself a descendant of formerly enslaved people. Johnson had been moved by Denzel's story and saw it as an opportunity to explore broader themes about memory, identity, and historical justice. "Denzel's story is really about all of us," Johnson explained during an interview. "It's about how we choose to remember the past and how that shapes our understanding of the present. Every family, every community has stories that have been hidden or forgotten. The question is whether we have the courage to uncover them." The film featured interviews with both families, as well as historians, genealogists, and other experts who provided context for Denzel's story. It also included dramatic recreations of key moments in Denzel's life based on the historical documents that had been uncovered. One of the most powerful scenes in the film was a recreation of the day Denzel left the Whitmore household for Boston. Based on Margaret Whitmore's diary entries, the scene showed the emotional farewell between the boy and the woman who had cared for him, highlighting the human cost of the family's decision. As the opening of the Smithsonian exhibition approached, both families found themselves grappling with the intense public attention their story had attracted. The Washington family, in particular, had to adjust to suddenly finding themselves in the spotlight. "We're not used to this kind of attention," admitted Michael Washington during a family meeting to prepare for the exhibition opening. "But if it helps other families uncover their own hidden histories, then it's worth it." Dr. Washington Brown had become something of a spokesperson for the family, giving interviews and speaking at academic conferences about the broader implications of Denzel's story. "This isn't just about our family," she emphasized in her presentations. "This is about the thousands of people who were erased from history because their presence was inconvenient or uncomfortable for those in power." The opening ceremony for the Smithsonian exhibition took place on February 15, 2024, exactly 141 years after Denzel had been sent away from the Whitmore household. The event drew hundreds of attendees, including historians, civil rights leaders, genealogists, and members of both families. Eleanor Hartwell spoke first, her voice strong despite her obvious emotion. "My family made a terrible choice 141 years ago," she said, standing before the restored photograph that showed Denzel as a young boy. "They chose social acceptance over moral courage, reputation over truth. We cannot undo that choice, but we can ensure that Denzel Washington is finally given the recognition and respect he deserved." Dr. Washington Brown followed, speaking about her great-grandfather's legacy and the importance of uncovering hidden histories. "Denzel was erased from one family's story, but today he becomes part of everyone's story. This exhibition will remind future generations that every person matters. Every life has value, and the truth will always find a way to emerge." The most moving moment of the ceremony came when the two families stood together before the restored photograph, joined by Sarah and Dr. Thompson, who had made the discovery possible. The image was captured by photographers and quickly became an iconic representation of reconciliation and historical justice. In the months following the exhibition opening, the impact of Denzel's story continued to grow. Museums around the world began launching their own projects to uncover hidden histories in their collections. Genealogical societies reported a surge in interest from people wanting to research their own family histories more thoroughly. The story also sparked important conversations about the ongoing effects of historical erasure. Civil rights organizations used Denzel's story as a starting point for discussions about how marginalized communities continue to be excluded from mainstream historical narratives. Denzel's story shows us that erasure isn't just something that happened in the past, explained Dr. Thompson during a panel discussion at Howard University. It's an ongoing process that continues today. Every time we fail to include diverse voices in our historical narratives, every time we overlook the contributions of marginalized communities, we're perpetuating the same kind of erasure that happened to Denzel. The educational impact of the discovery was perhaps most significant. Schools across the country began incorporating Denzel's story into their curricula, using it to teach students about the complexities of American history and the importance of questioning official narratives. A high school teacher in Atlanta, Ms. Jennifer Rodriguez, developed a lesson plan that used the restored photograph as a starting point for students to research their own family histories. The students are fascinated by the idea that photographs can lie, she explained. It makes them think more critically about all the sources they encounter. The Denzel Washington Educational Fund continued to grow, with donations coming from around the world. By the end of 2024, the fund had awarded scholarships to over 50 students, helping them pursue education and training in fields ranging from skilled trades to civil rights law. One of the scholarship recipients, Maria Santos, the young woman from Hartford, who was training to be a welder, spoke about the impact of Denzel's story on her own life. Learning about Denzel's determination to educate himself and build a successful career despite all the obstacles he faced, that inspires me every day, she said. He shows us that no matter where you come from or what challenges you face, you can create your own legacy. The memorial garden at the Whitmore mansion became a popular destination for visitors interested in learning about Denzel's story. The restored ironwork gate, with its intricate patterns and skilled craftsmanship, served as a tangible reminder of Denzel's talents and achievements. Eleanor Hartwell often served as a volunteer guide for visitors to the memorial garden. Despite her advanced age, she was passionate about sharing Denzel's story and helping people understand the historical context of his erasure and restoration. People often ask me if I feel guilty about what my ancestors did, she would tell visitors. Of course I do, but guilt alone isn't enough. The important thing is what we do with that knowledge. Do we hide from it, or do we use it to build something better? The documentary The Erased Boy premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January 2025 and was subsequently picked up for distribution by a major streaming service. The film brought Denzel's story to an even wider audience and sparked additional conversations about historical memory and reconciliation. One of the most powerful responses to the film came from a viewer in South Africa who wrote to the filmmakers about discovering a similar case of erasure in her own family's history. Watching Denzel's story gave me the courage to ask difficult questions about my own family's past, she wrote. We found evidence that my great-grandfather had deliberately removed references to his mixed-race heritage from family documents. Your film showed me that confronting these hidden truths, no matter how painful, is the only way to heal. Similar responses poured in from around the world. A family in Germany discovered that their ancestors had erased evidence of Jewish relatives during the Nazi period. A family in Australia found that their great-grandmother had hidden her Aboriginal heritage. Each discovery reinforced the universal nature of Denzel's story and the ongoing relevance of his experience. Sarah's work on the case had transformed her career and her understanding of her role as a historian. She had been invited to speak at conferences around the world and had received numerous awards for her groundbreaking research. But more importantly, she had found a new sense of purpose in her work. Denzel taught me that restoration isn't just about fixing old photographs, she reflected during an interview for a professional journal. It's about restoring dignity, restoring truth, and restoring the connections that bind us all together as human beings. The techniques Sarah had developed were being used to uncover hidden histories in collections around the world. The Vatican had commissioned her to examine historical paintings for evidence of alterations. The British Museum was using her methods to analyze colonial-era photographs. Museums in Africa were applying her techniques to recover images of cultural artifacts that had been deliberately obscured in colonial documentation. Dr. Thompson had also found his career transformed by the discovery. He had been appointed to lead a new initiative at Howard University focused on uncovering hidden African-American histories. The Denzel Washington Institute for Historical Recovery, as it was named, was developing new methodologies for identifying and documenting cases of historical erasure. Denzel's story has shown us that these hidden histories are everywhere, Dr. Thompson explained during the Institute's inaugural symposium. We just need to know how to look for them and have the courage to tell them when we find them. The Institute's first major project was a comprehensive survey of family photographs in African American communities, looking for evidence of similar erasures or manipulations. Early results suggested that Denzel's case was far from unique. Dozens of families had stories of relatives who had been deliberately removed from family records or photographs. As 2025 progressed, the impact of Denzel's story continued to ripple outward. The restored photograph had become one of the most recognizable images in American history, appearing in textbooks, documentaries, and museum exhibitions around the world. But perhaps the most meaningful legacy was the ongoing relationship between the Whitmore and Washington families. What had begun as a painful confrontation with historical truth had evolved into a genuine friendship and partnership. Eleanor Hartwell and Dr. Washington Brown had become close friends, often appearing together at speaking engagements and working collaboratively on new initiatives. Their friendship served as a powerful example of how historical wounds could be healed through honest dialogue and mutual respect. Angela has taught me so much about resilience and forgiveness, Eleanor said during a joint interview. Her family could have responded to our discovery with anger and demands for compensation. Instead, they chose to work with us to ensure that Denzel's story would be told with dignity and respect. Dr. Washington Brown was equally generous in her assessment of Eleanor's role. Eleanor could have tried to suppress this story or minimize her family's responsibility. Instead, she chose to embrace the truth and work actively to honor my great-grandfather's memory. That takes real courage. The two women had begun working on a book together, tentatively titled Erased and Restored, a story of two families and the power of truth. The book would tell the complete story of Denzel's erasure and restoration, but it would also explore broader themes about historical memory, racial reconciliation, and the ongoing struggle for justice in America. We want this book to be more than just our story, Dr. Washington Brown explained. We want it to be a guide for other families and communities who are grappling with difficult histories. We want to show that it's possible to confront painful truths and emerge stronger on the other side. The younger generations of both families had also been profoundly affected by the discovery. Eleanor's great-nephew, David Hartwell, a recent college graduate, had changed his major from business to history after learning about Denzel's story. I realized that I wanted to be part of uncovering these hidden histories, he explained. There are probably thousands of stories like Denzel's waiting to be discovered. I want to help find them. Similarly, Dr. Washington Brown's grandson, Marcus Washington, had been inspired to pursue a career in documentary filmmaking, hoping to tell stories about overlooked figures in African American history. Denzel's story showed me the power of visual storytelling, Marcus said. A single photograph changed everything. It brought my great-great-grandfather back to life and forced people to confront uncomfortable truths. I want to use film to do the same thing for other forgotten stories. The educational initiatives inspired by Denzel's story had also continued to expand. The National Education Association had developed a curriculum package based on his story, which was being used in schools across the country. The package included lesson plans for different grade levels, primary source documents, and interactive activities that helped students understand the complexities of historical research and interpretation. One particularly innovative program was developed by a middle school in Boston's South End, not far from where Denzel had lived and worked. Students in the program conducted their own research into the neighborhood's history, interviewing elderly residents and examining historical photographs for evidence of hidden stories. The students have become real detectives, explained the program coordinator, Ms. Lisa Chen. They've discovered stories about immigrant families who changed their names, about businesses that were owned by women but registered under their husbands' names, about community leaders whose contributions were overlooked by mainstream historians. Denzel's story has taught them that history is all around us, waiting to be uncovered. The program's most significant discovery came when students found evidence that a local park had originally been named after an African-American Civil War veteran, but the name had been changed in the 1920s during a period of increased racial tension. Working with community leaders and city officials, the students successfully advocated for the park's original name to be restored. These young people are carrying on Denzel's legacy, observed Dr. Thompson during a visit to the school. They're refusing to let important stories remain hidden. They're insisting that everyone's contributions be recognized and remembered. The international impact of Denzel's story had also continued to grow. The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, had featured the case in a report on the importance of preserving cultural memory and combating historical erasure. The story of Denzel Washington demonstrates both the fragility and the resilience of historical memory, the UNESCO report stated. It shows us how easily important stories can be lost, but also how modern technology and determined researchers can recover them. It reminds us that we all have a responsibility to preserve and protect the full diversity of human experience. Museums and cultural institutions around the world had begun implementing new protocols for examining their collections for evidence of historical manipulation or erasure. The Denzel Protocol had become an international standard, and Sarah's laboratory at Yale had become a training center for researchers from around the globe. As the second anniversary of the discovery approached in October 2025, both families reflected on how profoundly their lives had been changed by the revelation of Denzel's story. For the Whitmore family, the discovery had forced a painful reckoning with their ancestors' actions, but it had also provided an opportunity for redemption and growth. The family's historical legacy was now inextricably linked with Denzel's story, but rather than being a source of shame, it had become a source of purpose. We can't change what our ancestors did, reflected Robert Whitmore III, who had initially been resistant to acknowledging the family's role in Denzel's erasure. But we can choose how we respond to that knowledge. We can choose to be part of the solution rather than perpetuating the problem. For the Washington family, the discovery had provided a missing piece of their family puzzle and had elevated their ancestors' story to national prominence. But more importantly, it had given them a platform to advocate for other families whose stories had been hidden or forgotten. Denzel's story has become bigger than just our family, reflected Michael Washington. It's become a symbol of resilience and the power of truth. That's a responsibility we don't take lightly. The story had also had a profound impact on the broader conversation about race and historical memory in America. Denzel's erasure and restoration had become a powerful metaphor for the ongoing struggle to acknowledge and address the country's history of racial injustice. Denzel's story forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about American history, observed Dr. Henry Louis Gates, Jr., the renowned historian and genealogist, during a symposium on the case. It shows us that the erasure of African American experiences wasn't just something that happened during slavery or Jim Crow. It was happening in northern, supposedly progressive families well into the late 19th century. And it reminds us that this kind of erasure continues today in more subtle forms. The case had also sparked important conversations about the role of technology in historical research. Sarah's use of advanced imaging techniques to reveal Denzel's hidden image had demonstrated the potential for modern technology to uncover lost histories. We're living in a golden age of historical discovery, explained Dr. Sarah Lewis, a professor of art history at Harvard University. New technologies are allowing us to see things that previous generations of researchers could never have imagined. But technology alone isn't enough. We also need the courage and commitment to pursue difficult truths, even when they challenge our comfortable assumptions about the past. As the story of Denzel Washington continued to resonate around the world, it served as a powerful reminder that history is not a fixed narrative, but an ongoing conversation between past and present. Every generation has the opportunity and the responsibility to examine the stories they've inherited and to decide whether to perpetuate them or to seek a more complete truth. The restored photograph of the Whitmore family, with Denzel's image now clearly visible, had become more than just a historical artifact. It had become a symbol of the power of truth to emerge from even the most determined efforts at concealment. It reminded viewers that behind every historical document, every family photograph, every official record, there were human stories waiting to be discovered and honored. Denzel Washington's journey from erasure to restoration was complete, but his legacy was just beginning. His story would continue to inspire future generations of researchers, activists, and ordinary people who refuse to accept that any human being should be forgotten or erased from history. In the end, the boy who had been deliberately removed from a family photograph in 1883 had achieved a kind of immortality that his erasers could never have imagined. His image, his story, and his legacy had become part of the permanent record of American history, ensuring that he would never again be forgotten or ignored. The truth, as Margaret Whitmore had written in her hidden diary so many years ago, had indeed found a way to emerge, and in emerging it had brought with it the possibility of understanding, reconciliation, and redemption, not just for two families, but for an entire nation still grappling with the complex legacy of its past. This incredible journey from erasure to restoration shows us that no story is ever truly lost forever. Denzel Washington's legacy reminds us that every person matters, every life has value, and the truth will always find a way to emerge. Sometimes after 140 years, but it emerges nonetheless. Subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories of historical discoveries that changed everything we thought we knew about the past. Hit that notification bell so you never miss these incredible true stories that prove the past is never truly buried.